I am 90 years old, and the secret to why I am still here is not my diet. It is not a supplement I take every morning. It is not a specific food I avoided for 40 years or a particular habit I built when I was young and disciplined. It is not anything that has a label on it or a price tag or a 5-step program designed by someone with credentials I'm supposed to find impressive. All of those things exist, and some of them matter, and I will tell you exactly how much they matter, which is less than you are currently being told, and considerably less than the thing I am actually going to talk about today. I spent 41 years as the county tax assessor in Fayetteville, Arkansas. I kept the financial records of an entire community for 4 decades. I balanced budgets and audited accounts and sat with numbers that did not lie, because numbers do not lie if you are honest with them, and I was always honest with them. And I am bringing that same habit to this conversation today, because the honest accounting of why some people live long and well and others don't is not the accounting that is being presented to you, and I am not willing to let that stand uncorrected. I buried my husband Harold in 2016 after 54 years of marriage, and after 4 years of watching emphysema hollow him out from the inside. 4 years of oxygen tanks and difficult nights, and the particular grief of losing someone slowly in a house that is still full of them. I buried my son Gary in 2011. He was 52 years old, and his heart stopped on a Tuesday morning in April. And I have spent 13 years trying to find an entry in the ledger of my life where that makes sense, and I have not found one. And I have stopped looking. I lost Nadine, who sat 2 desks away from me for 29 years, and who was the only other person in Fayetteville who found county tax law genuinely interesting, which sounds like a small thing and was not. I lost my brother Willard. I surrendered my driver's license in 2022 after a minor accident, and I want to tell you that the handing over of those keys felt like losing something I did not have a word for, some piece of my own capacity that I had taken for granted for 68 years, and that was simply gone now, and I had to find a way to account for the gap. I have outlived people who were more careful than me. People who ate better, moved more, slept by a schedule, followed every piece of health advice that I absorbed and filed away and did not always follow. That is not luck. It is information. And the information is pointing at something that nobody in the wellness industry wants to talk about because you cannot put it in a bottle. Let me tell you what it points at. Let me tell you who I am before you decide this is the comfortable wisdom of someone who happened to make it to 90 without trying very hard. I grew up outside of Fayetteville in a farmhouse with 4 children and 1 bathroom, and a father who kept a ledger on the kitchen table that he updated every Sunday evening without fail, recording every dollar that came in and every dollar that went out with a precision that I found as a child hypnotic. He was not an accountant. He was a man who understood that not looking at the numbers did not make the numbers better, and that knowing exactly what you had was always, even when what you had was not much, better than not knowing. I started at the county assessor's office in 1958 when I was 28 years old, because I was good at numbers and the county needed someone who was good at numbers And those two facts found each other on a Wednesday morning in September, and I stayed for 41 years. I was not glamorous work. It was necessary work, which is a different thing and, in my opinion, a better thing. When I retired in 1999, the county threw a small party, and the assessor who replaced me sent me a card every Christmas for 11 years that said he was still finding things I had organized in ways he did not initially understand, and eventually came to consider the only reasonable approach. I tell you all of that so you understand that when I say I have looked honestly at the numbers on this question, the question of what actually keeps a person alive and functional and genuinely present in the world at 90, I mean it. I have looked at the data of my own life with the same attention I gave to 41 years of county financial records. And the conclusion I have reached is uncomfortable, and I am going to tell you plainly. The moment this whole thing came into focus for me was a Saturday morning in October of 2020, 4 years after Harold died. I was 86 years old. I was sitting at this kitchen table with a cup of coffee, and I looked around this house, the house Harold and I had lived in together since 1964. The house where I had raised Gary and his sister Carolyn, and had kept every record of our financial life in a filing cabinet that is still in the back bedroom and that I still update. And I asked myself a question that I had not asked before. I asked, Mildred, what is keeping you here? Not why haven't you died yet? What is keeping you here, meaning present, engaged, genuinely in the world, rather than simply occupying space in it? What is it specifically that makes you get up in the morning with something to do rather than something to wait out? The answer I came to is the thing I want to tell you. Here is the honest accounting, and I want you to stay with it even when it becomes uncomfortable, because the discomfort is the useful part. We have been told by medicine, by the wellness industry, by every article with a headline about longevity, and every book with a photograph of a 90-year-old doing yoga on the cover, that the primary determinants of how long and how well we live are our physical inputs, what we eat, how we move, how we sleep, how carefully we manage our biology, and those things matter. I am not going to tell you they don't matter. I am going to tell you they are not the main column in the ledger. Because in 90 years of living in one community and watching what happened to the people around me as they aged, and in 41 years of keeping records precise enough to notice patterns that other people missed, I have observed something that does not fit into any wellness program I have ever encountered. The people who make it to 85 and 90 with something genuinely alive still in them, not just a body that continues, but a person who is still fully present and still connected and still engaged, are almost never distinguished primarily by what they eat or how they exercise. They are distinguished by whether they still have something they are needed for, whether their presence still makes a measurable difference to something outside themselves, whether the world they inhabit would be noticeably different without them in it. That is the main column. Everything else is supporting data. And the paradox that I have turned over in my mind since that Saturday morning in October of 2020 is this. The industry that has grown up around longevity is focused almost entirely on the supporting data and almost entirely silent about the main column, because the main column cannot be sold. You cannot package it. You cannot subscribe to it. You can only build it slowly through choices that do not feel like health decisions when you make them, but that turn out to be the most consequential health decisions of your life. Here is what I built, and here is what I am still building at 90. The first truth is that purpose is not a philosophical luxury. It is a biological necessity, and treating it like a luxury is one of the most expensive mistakes a person can make in the second half of their life. After Harold died in 2016, I did what competent people do with loss. I managed it. I kept the house in order. I maintained my routines. I ate reasonably and slept adequately, and presented to anyone who asked as someone who was doing fine, which is the response my generation was trained to give, and which I gave automatically for about 18 months before I noticed that fine was not quite accurate. What I noticed in the spring of 2018 was that I was doing everything I was supposed to be doing, and something was wrong anyway. Not medically wrong. Wrong in the way a set of books is wrong when the columns add up, but the total doesn't match. Technically correct and fundamentally off. What was off was purpose. Specific, concrete, irreplaceable purpose. Harold had needed me in ways that were real and daily, and that I had not fully registered as purpose because I had been providing it for so long it had become invisible. The county work had needed me for 41 years. Gary had needed me. Nadine had needed me in the particular way that a long work friendship generates genuine mutual need. And by 2018, most of those specific needings were gone. And the body, which is smarter than we give it credit for, was registering the absence. I did not find a new purpose. I excavated one that had been there all along and that I had been too busy to develop properly. I had been the unofficial keeper of the county's institutional memory for 41 years, the person who knew why certain decisions had been made in 1971 and what the implications were for current policy. When I retired, that knowledge went largely unused because I had retired from the position, and the position was where people thought the knowledge lived. It did not live in the position. It lived in me. I called the current county assessor, a woman named Donna Prewitt, who had taken the job in 2012 and who I had met once at a retirement function, and I said, I have 41 years of institutional knowledge about this county's financial records that is going to die with me if nobody asks for it, and I am offering it to you before that happens. Donna said, I have been wondering how to ask you for 2 years. I have been consulting with that office on an informal basis since the fall of 2018, not as an employee, as someone who knows things and is willing to make them available to people who can use them. 2 afternoons a month, sometimes more, for 5 years. My presence in that office makes a difference that would not be made without me. I know this because they have told me, and because I can see it in the quality of the decisions. That is not a hobby. That is purpose. And I believe, with the conviction of a woman who has balanced a great many ledgers, that it is one of the primary reasons I am still here doing it at 90. The second truth is that the quality and honesty of your closest relationships is doing more for your longevity than any dietary choice you have ever made. I want to put a number on this because I am a numbers person, and numbers make things real in a way that general statements do not. The research on social isolation and loneliness, which I read in considerable quantity after Harold died, and after Nadine died, and after I found myself spending weeks without substantive in-person contact, indicates that chronic loneliness produces health outcomes equivalent to smoking approximately 15 cigarettes per day. That number is not metaphorical. It reflects measurable biological deterioration across multiple body systems. I was lonely after Harold and Nadine were gone in ways that I did not initially name correctly because I was calling it grief, which it partly was, and adjusting, which it partly was, and independence, which it was absolutely not. I was isolated, and I was managing the isolation with the same discipline I had brought to managing everything else in my life, which is to say I was keeping the books in order on the outside while the underlying position deteriorated. What I did about it was the thing I had been raised not to do, which was ask directly. I called my daughter Carolyn in the spring of 2019, and I said, "I need to tell you something true about how things are here, and I need you to hear it without immediately trying to solve it." She said, "All right, Mama." And I told her that I was lonely in the specific, daily, getting worse way, not the general background way, and that I did not know how to fix it by myself, and I was asking for her help thinking it through. That conversation produced 3 things that are still in place today. Carolyn comes on the 2nd Sunday of every month for dinner, which I cook, and we eat at this table, and we talk about real things rather than managing things. I rejoined my church after 2 years away. I had stopped going because sitting in the pew where Harold and I had sat together for decades was a thing I could not manage, and eventually I sat in a different pew, which solved the problem in the simple, practical way that most problems yield to when you stop being precious about them. And I called 2 women from the old county office who I had let drift, the way you let things drift when you are busy. And then when you stop being busy, you realize you have lost the habit of them. And I reinstated the contact, and it took about 6 months to feel natural again, and it has felt natural since. Loneliness is a solvable problem. It requires asking for what you need, which is uncomfortable, and rebuilding what you let drift, which takes longer than you want it to, but it is solvable. And the solving of it is worth more to your longevity than anything you are going to find at a pharmacy. The third truth, the things you keep doing when nobody requires you to, are telling you something important about what is actually keeping you alive. I still do the books for 2 small local businesses, not because I need the income, which is modest, because I need the doing of it. I need to sit with a set of numbers that has a problem in it and find the problem and resolve it. That need is as real to me as hunger. When I have gone periods without having a set of books to work on, something in me goes restless in a way that I have learned to take seriously as a physiological signal rather than a preference. Harold used to say I was going to be doing someone's taxes on my deathbed, and he meant it as a mild joke, and I took it as a mild compliment, and I think we were both right. The work I keep doing is the work that keeps me. The 2 things are not separate. What do you keep doing when nobody requires you to? Not what you think you should do. What you actually do on an unremarkable Tuesday afternoon when there is no external demand, and you do it anyway because not doing it feels like a loss rather than a rest. That thing is information. Protect it. The people who stop doing it because it seems impractical or because someone suggests they simplify their life. I have watched that simplification produce consistently a kind of dimming that does not reverse. Do not simplify away the thing that is keeping you present. The fourth truth is one I held onto the longest and that I am least proud of having held on to. The help you refuse costs more than the help you accept. I am a woman who has managed things. 41 years of managing other people's financial records, 54 years of managing a household, 4 years of managing Harold's illness. The management is not a skill set. It is an identity, and that identity, in the years since Harold died, has been slowly and quietly costing me things I could not afford to lose. I did not tell Carolyn for 7 months that I had fallen in the kitchen in 2021. Minor fall, no injury, but a fall. I did not tell her because telling her would have meant admitting something about the direction of things that I was not ready to admit. I managed it alone, and I learned from it alone, and I modified the kitchen alone, and I told her eventually in the past tense as something resolved rather than in the present tense as something happening. And she looked at me across this table and said, "Mama, why didn't you tell me?" And I said what was true, which is, because I wasn't ready for what telling you would mean. She said, "I understand, but I would rather know." I have been practicing since that conversation the specific and uncomfortable habit of telling the people who love me what is actually happening before it is resolved rather than after. It is not natural to me. It is not comfortable, but it is producing something that management alone never produced, which is the feeling that I am not carrying the weight of this life entirely by myself, that there are people who know the actual ledger, not the presented version. That feeling is not sentiment. It is, I believe, one of the things that is keeping me here. The fifth truth, and this is the one that took me longest to arrive at and that I consider most important, is that the will to continue is a choice, not a dramatic one-time choice, a daily choice. And most people do not know it is a choice until they are already in the process of not making it. I watched Harold make this choice every day for the last 2 years of his life, when the emphysema had taken most of his physical capacity. He could not go outside. He could barely walk to the kitchen, and every morning he got up and he sat in the chair by the window with his coffee, and he watched the yard, and he asked me what was happening in the county, and he had opinions about it. He was choosing every day to remain engaged with a world that his body could barely access. And that choosing, I watched it keep him more present, more himself, more Harold, than his physical condition alone would have predicted. After he was gone, I had to figure out how to make that choice for myself without him as my primary reason for making it. That is a different thing than making it alongside someone. It required me to answer, honestly, the question I asked myself on that October Saturday in 2020. What is keeping you here? The answer I found was not one thing. It was an accumulation. the county assessor consultations, and the bookkeeping, and the Sunday dinners with Carolyn, and the rebuilt friendships, and the church pew that is not the same pew but is still the same church, of specific concrete connections to things outside myself that would be poorer without me. Not dramatically poorer, not irreparably poorer, but actually measurably, noticeably poorer in the specific ways that add up to a reason. I review that accumulation the way I would review a balance sheet, not every day, regularly. I check whether the items on the list are still real or whether they have become theoretical, whether I am still actually connected to them or just intending to be. When something has become theoretical, I make it actual again. When something has disappeared, I find what belongs in that position and I put something there. That is the work, not the diet. I want to stop and speak to you directly because I have been doing this long enough to know that you have been absorbing this as wisdom that applies to someone else. You have been thinking about your mother, your father, your friend who retired 3 years ago and has been getting quieter in the way that worries you and that you have not yet addressed directly, because addressing it directly requires a conversation you have been organizing for months without having. I am telling you, it also applies to you. You have something you have let become theoretical, a connection that exists in intention but not in practice, a purpose that was real 3 years ago and that you have been meaning to reinstate, a piece of your own ledger that you have been avoiding looking at because the number there is not good, and looking at it means you have to do something about it. Look at it today, not because looking at it is comfortable, but because not looking at it is not, despite how it feels, the safe choice. The safe choice is the honest accounting. The safe choice is always the honest accounting. And right now, while you are sitting here, there is someone in your life who is managing something alone that you do not know about because they were raised to manage things, the way I was raised to manage things, and they have not yet run out of the energy it takes to keep it managed and hidden. They are going to run out. It happens to everyone eventually. Ask them before they run out. Ask them now, while the asking can be responded to from a position of some strength rather than from the bottom of the thing. I will tell you plainly where I am. I am 90 years old, and I know the arithmetic of things, and I have made my peace with it in the way that a bookkeeper makes peace with a balance that is going to close eventually. Not with denial, not with drama, but with an acknowledgement that the closing is part of the accounting, and the accounting should be honest all the way through.